Hi guys, if you enjoy my videos, consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm really notices me. I would really appreciate it. And yes, I'm back. I was 16, a city kid from Chicago, but my family had roots in Alabama. They owned a large farm and some land in Huntsville. My uncle had a big house there and several trailers in the woods for hunting and camping. During a visit, my southern cousins suggested we camp out there. We gathered food, prepared some livestock, and packed for a few days in the wilderness. Upon arrival, the air had a peculiar electric smell, like ozone before a storm. We shrugged it off, unpacked, and headed to a creek for a swim. Suddenly, an older man and a teenager holding a shotgun emerged from the bushes. They inquired about our activities. We mentioned my uncle, whom they knew, and our camping plans. The man warned us to be cautious due to a large animal sighting in the area. His son, about my age, asked to join us, and we agreed. So we end up playing football. Playing around with me, there's the kid Tanner, 5 of my cousins, and then 4 of their friends. In total, there were 5 girls and 6 boys. We all were around 15, 17. We ended up just playing the day away. So we headed back to the camp and pulled out some stuff for a campfire, even though the trailers both had kitchenettes. Tanner says that his family's property sits up against my uncle's. He wants to run home and ask his dad if he can come out camping with us. My cousin Rooster says he's going to go with him since it's going to get dark soon. One of the girls also wants to tag along. It's about 7 o'clock, and it's starting to get pretty dark. They take flashlights and take the trail toward Tan's property. The rest of us chill. We make s'mores and drink. About 30 or 40 minutes later, there's the smell of ozone again. You could smell it over the smell of the fire we had started. This really nasty, coppery smell, like right after you've had a nosebleed and it's stopped. It wasn't exactly like dried blood, but it was that nasty metallic back of your throat smell. We immediately think that it's some kind of electrical malfunction or someone left a hot plate on or some stuff. We search the trailers and nothing is on, and we can all smell it. All of a sudden, we can hear people booking down the path toward us, and Rooster, Tan, and the girl all come running into the clearing, out of breath. And they don't even break stride. They all run into the trailer, right by where the fire is. We all get the hell out of there and into the trailer. They end up calming down. Even Rooster is crying his eyes out at this point. All the while, the fire is guttering lower and lower. So my other cousins say screw it, and are about to go outside to get the generator out of a shed between the trailers. Tanner goes, "Fudge no, lock the front door, ain't nobody else going outside." He's been crying too, and his eyes are bloodshot and puffy, and his pants are dirty as hell. He goes on to tell us that they went up to his house. His father said sure he could go out camping, but to make sure they were careful on the way back, and that maybe they should take one of the hunting rifles just in case. Evidently, Tanner had seen something in their yard a few days before. One of their pigs had come up, ripped up and half-eaten. They assumed it was just some big cats or coyotes, even though they don't usually mess with live animals. He had gone upstairs and packed his stuff, and told his dad they would be okay without the rifle because coyotes avoid people. So they started walking back toward where we were camping. So Rooster finally stopped crying and shaking. The girl already had. But she was just staring out the window with a stunned look on her face. He says they had gotten halfway into the woods toward the camp when they started to hear stuff in the forest. It was almost pitch black by this time, so they weren't sure at first what the hell it was. The girl says that she heard something in the bushes right off the trail, and they all beamed their flashlights over there, and there was someone standing back in the woods in a little hollow. Rooster said they shouted at him and told him that he was scaring the fudge out of them and what a prick he was. He says that's when he realized that the guy was facing away from them. So they keep walking, and they start smelling the nasty, coppery ozone smell. They say that they look off into the forest on the opposite side, and it's a dude standing in the forest, backwards slightly closer to the path. So now they start power walking, and Tan keeps going, "I should have taken the rifle." As they're telling the story, The smell is still super strong even inside the cabin. They say that after they started walking faster, a kind of low gibbering had started coming from both sides of the wood. As they started booking it back to the trailer, the girl said she had flashed her flashlight out into the woods to the side of them and had seen something jerking itself through the woods. The gibbering just got louder and louder, and when they could see the light from our campfire, something had come out of the woods about 40 yards behind them onto the track, and they had just flat out run as hard as they could to the trailer. So we're out in the woods, and we're assuming at this point it's some rednecks or some stuff trying to mess with us. All of a sudden, my other cousin, Junior, starts going on about how he went to school with a native kid who was telling him about the Goatman or some stuff. We promptly tell him to shut the fudge up because we don't need any spooky talk right now. But he just keeps going on and on about how it's the Goatman and how we're in his woods and blah, blah, blah. Now, at the time, I had never heard of this Goatman or any of that. But then a couple years ago, the year before I graduated from college, I had a native for a roommate, and I ended up asking him about it. And to sum it up, it's basically a man with the head of a goat, and he can shapeshift and get among groups of people to terrorize them. It's also supposed to be kind of like the Wendigo, and it's bad mojo to even talk about it, and even worse if you see it. Keep in mind, I didn't know this back when I was 16. So my cousin is going, the Goatman's going to get in and get us. The girls are all terrified, and my cousins and I are all trying to figure out if it's just some hillbillies or if it's some animal. So all of a sudden the smell just goes away. Like to this day, I haven't even experienced anything like it. Like usually smells fade away or lessen. It just literally was there 1 second, and then not the second. So it's after an hour, making it around 9 or 10. We've stopped panicking enough to go back outside and stoke the fire again. We figure it was just some creeps trying to mess with us so we don't go back home, because we think if we do, they'll chase us through the woods or some crazy stuff. Nothing else weird happened that night. We stayed another night, and for the main part of the second night, nothing happens. Then at about 1 in the morning, we're outside getting drunk and telling ghost stories. As someone is finishing some spooky story, I don't remember what about, the smell comes back. It's so freaking strong that one of the girls literally starts vomiting. I stand up and you can actually feel how clammy the air is. I say we should get inside and this isn't right. We should have just left. We all go back inside and we're standing around. My cousin just keeps going on about how it's the Goatman, and my cousin Rooster tries to shut him up. And all the while I'm just feeling that something is wrong, and I can't figure out what the hell it is. We end up sitting in there for a while. The smell is just as strong, and we're terrified and all huddled in this camper. We end up cooking brats for everybody because nobody wants to go outside. It's one of those packs with 4 brats. We have a total of 3 packs. I grill them up on the stove and give everybody a hot dog. I get mine. After a while, one of my cousins gets up and goes over to the pot to get another one. He starts grumbling about how I get 2 brats and everybody else only got 1, and I look at him like he's stupid. I tell him that everybody only got 1 because there were only 12 brats, and if he wants more, he should open up a new pack and cook some more. That's when the girl that had been out with Rooster and Tan just starts screaming, "Oh Jesus, oh Lord, get it out." She's crying and shivering, and then it dawns on the cousin standing up to what the hell is wrong. Me and him both glance around the room, and then I feel my heart sink. I run the hell out of the cabin, and the girl runs out with us. The trailer door is banging against the side of the trailer as everybody books out of the cabin. One of my cousin's friends asked us what the fudge was wrong. I start counting us. There's only 11 of us now. I shit you not, my cousin verified. There had been 12 people in the cabin, but being that everybody didn't really know each other well, nobody had really noticed the whole freaking time that there was an extra person. And then I realized earlier that I had kind of noticed something was off. You know how when you're just playing around and having a good time, you don't sweat the smallest stuff, and you don't always keep track of certain stuff? I'm dead sure that someone else had been in the trailer with us, and that they had been there for at least a whole day, eating with us. What makes it worse is that I couldn't figure out which one because I don't think anyone ever actually interacted with the other person / the Goatman. The girl kept praying to Jesus and we're all sitting outside. Eventually, we get big-ass sticks and go back in the cabin, but there's nobody in there. We count again, and there's 11 people. We go back into the trailer and lock the door. We explain what the hell happened, and the girl says that she realized too, and that when she was about to say something, the person sitting next to her had grabbed her leg hard, leaned over toward her, and said something she couldn't understand. So we are pretty much scared as hell as we huddle together, and I fall asleep. When I wake up, the sun is just coming up, and half the people are asleep and the other half are packing our stuff up. We all want to walk back home, but like 4 people want to stay until the sun is all the way up. And some people think that we're just fudging around and still want to stay at the trailers. I just want to get the hell out of the woods. The girl's name was Kira, the one that the Goatman had touched. Anyway, I asked her if she really thought it was something bad, and she said she just wanted to go home, and she doesn't want to be out in the woods alone for another night. So we decide to split up. The 4 that want to go can go, but I have to stay because I have the keys to the cabin, and it's my uncle's, and I have to lock up. I'm super pissed at this point because I feel like people aren't taking this stuff seriously, and I definitely didn't want to be out in the woods for another night. I spend the rest of the day trying to convince the rest of the people, now 4 girls and 4 guys, to get the fudge out of Dodge. Tanner leaves with them to go get a rifle and says he's going to be back. So there are just 7 of us left by 4 p.m. At around 5 p.m. he hadn't made it back yet, and we were getting extremely antsy, and the only reason I stopped begging them to go back was because he went to get a gun. It's about 5:30 p.m. or so when the one cousin that did stay says that the girl Kira is outside. We all look outside, and sure enough, she's standing by the fire pit with her back to the cabin. I'm thinking to myself, if she was so freaking scared, why the hell would she come back? And then I get this nasty feeling in my gut. Keep in mind, the whole time the coppery smell has been gone. Now I realize I can smell just a twinge of it. I say this to the rest of them and everybody, and these are the people that wanted to stay in the freaking woods after we had the damn Goatman in our midst, is laughing at me and asking if I set this up to scare them. I'm looking at them like, I'm not bullshitting you at all right now. I ask them why the fudge would I play like that. So one of the girls goes outside to get Kira. She gets halfway to her and stops cold. Kira starts heaving. I don't know how the hell to describe it. Sort of like if someone with their back turned was laughing without actually making any sound. It was this fact that made me realize there was not a freaking sound in the whole woods. It was dead silent. This was like later in September, so it was still fairly hot at the time. But it was super chilly some days too, and you could usually hear geese honking or some kind of birds or squirrels chit-chatting. So I step out the door and tell her to come back in the freaking trailer, right damn now. She backs up into the trailer and we lock the door. We pull down all the shades except one and put a guy there in a chair to watch her. She stands there for another 20 minutes or so. The guy turns to say that she's still there. And then there's a huge bang on the door. We all jump up and scramble around the living room of the trailer. The banging is super loud. So now my cousin is holding one of the girls and the other 2 are kind of giggling with nervous laughter, and me and the other 2 guys are pale with fear. Then we hear Tan. He's screaming, "Let me in, stop playing." So we go over to the door and open it, and he stumbles in with a rifle. There's nobody else outside. Evidently he had walked up to the campsite. Nothing weird happened in the forest, but he had seen a girl. Mind you, he said it was not Kira standing there. When he had gotten to the edge of the clearing, she had turned toward him with a slack-jawed look and just stared him down, slowly tracking him as he walked around the outside of the clearing towards the camp. He said it wasn't till he was almost halfway to the trailer he realized that she was getting closer to him. She had started off by the fire, and without him even seeing her move, she had been turning, inching closer. He said he just ran the rest of the way back to the cabin thinking it would open. And when he got to the door and it was locked, he turned and it was about half the distance to the door. He looks around the room and then gets super pale. He pulls me to the side and whispers in my ear, "You know there are only 7 of us in here, right?" I get that feeling where your stomach drops to your knees. It had been back inside the trailer while we were sorting out who was going where, and then when we all went outside to talk earlier in the day, it has just slipped right back in. We looked out the window and there was nobody out there. So we recount everyone, and then basically I go over and ask everyone how many people were here earlier, and everybody says 8. I say, well, how many are here now? They all do the count and then realize there are only 7 people in the cabin now. So Ton had brought back a couple of boxes of ammo and his rifle. He had told his dad that there was some kind of animal in the forest, because he didn't think his dad would believe him if he said it was Goatman. He says that his cousin is supposed to be coming down in a few hours, and that in the morning we can all go back to his place, and his cousin will drive us home. Now I'm really terrified, but I at least feel better because we can be American and shoot the fudge out of whatever it is if it comes back. But then my cousin gets into this huge argument with one of the girls because she thinks that I'm trying to be funny and prank them, and that she's getting really scared, and that I'm not funny. He keeps telling her I'm not that kind of person, and she says, well, how do we know the girl wasn't just Tanner in a wig? Or if it's really the Goatman, how do we know that this is the real Tanner, and that Goatman just didn't kill Tanner in the woods and take his gun? So we get into a huge argument about this, where me and Tan are like, we could seriously be in danger because at the very least, someone has been sneaking themselves into our trailer without us knowing and mingling with us. And at worst, something bad is in the forest messing with us. One of the girls is crying and saying she wants to go right now, and we're trying to tell her we shouldn't because none of us are walking through the woods in the middle of the night. At this point, the sun is starting to go down and it's getting a little cloudy out. We eat something and turn on the radio for a while, but we can't really get a station out there with anything decent. So we turn it off at about the time that Tan's cousin shows up. He was like 19, I think. At this point, the sun is just barely over the horizon, and he has one of those heavy-duty lantern flashlights and another rifle. He walks up to the trailer, and we whisper to Tan, asking if he's sure that's his cousin, and he says yes. The guy looks behind him and all around the camp, then walks in. He kind of glances at all of us and looks a little confused. He says, "Where's your other little buddy at? I figured she would meet me up at the cabin. Is she a little slow or something?" He also asked whether we had been cooking blood in the cabin because it smelled like blood and hot pans all the way up the trail. We are all like, nope. But we ask him what the hell he's talking about with the girl he saw. He had come down the same trail Tan had been using, and he had come up on one of you guys' buddies, standing in the middle of the trail, looking at him slack-jawed. He had asked her a bunch of questions, but all she did was just look at him. Then she smiled at him, and he said he kept walking. She couldn't seem to keep up with him and kept lagging a little behind him. He said he asked her if she was hurt or something, and if she needed any help, but she had continued to stare. Eventually, he had been walking and turned around a bend in the trail. But when he turned around and went back to see if she was okay, the trail was empty. He'd assumed she had taken some shortcut through the woods to our trailer. We tell him the whole story of what's been going on. I half expected him to say we were full of stuff, but he just listened and then sat down on the couches in the living room. Tanner's cousin gets back to the girl. He said that when she had kept trying to lag behind him, it had kind of weirded him out, so he tried to keep her in front of him, but no matter how slow he walked, she was always lagging a little behind, and he smelled this nasty smell, and it got stronger as he got to the camp. Eventually, it got really strong. She had said something really low that he didn't catch, and when he had turned around, she had been right the fudge up on him, and he stepped back from her. It was at this point he asked her if she was okay, and if she wasn't, him to carry her back the rest of the way, and she just kept staring. He said he reached out for her, as in to grab her on the shoulder, but he must have misjudged the distance because she was off to the side of where he had put his hand like she had moved while he was looking dead at her. So at this point, we know this stuff's real unless Tan is playing a joke, which we can tell he's not because he's almost pissing his pants. So they load up their rifles, we eat some more, and we just kind of sit around until about 11. To this day, every time I think about this, I really pray to God that it's some huge prank that my cousins played on me and just never revealed, so I would be scared for the rest of my life. At round 11, the stink of copper turns into an actual nasty, gross, blood-like smell, like cooking blood and singed hair. Tan and his cousin Reese get up instantly and grab the rifles. There's like a half-knocking, half-clawing at the door, and I kid you not, there's this voice. And it sounds like when you see those YouTube cats and dogs whose owners teach them how to talk. It says in this halting, weirdly toned voice, "Let me in, stop playing." It made my nuts shrivel up against my body, and one of the girls just started crying and calling on Jesus. It was so obviously not a person talking. It didn't have the right cadence, and that's some stuff that I never realized until that moment. But all people have a certain cadence when they talk, no matter what language. All people have a certain kind of rhythm to talking. This thing didn't have any kind of cadence or rhythm. One of those YouTube cats, that's what it sounded like outside the door. So now I'm in full-on terror mode. We keep yelling outside, "Who is it? Stop messing around, man." And it just keeps saying, "In," or "let me in," for almost 15 minutes. It sounded extremely creepy. Sorry for being on a tangent, but if you can't imagine how this stuff sounded, then you can't imagine how messed up the whole situation was. So then the smell goes away for a while, and for the next hour or so you can hear someone basically creeping around in the woods and stuff. Every couple of minutes it'll come back to the door and say something. Finally, when the smell fades away, it's around 2 a.m. right now. Reese says, "Man, screw this," and opens the door and walks outside with his rifle. He fires a shot into the air and says something to the effect of, "In the name of Jesus Christ, go away." He fires 2 more times, and then from the woods, right up against the river across from the trailer, it sounds like something is slowly gibbering and hooting. Then it starts screaming, and it sounds almost like a woman and a cat in a bag screaming together. Like I seriously have never heard any stuff like that, and you can hear the brush over that way start to shake. Reese fires over into the tree line and then starts backing into the house. We lock the door, and we can hear this stuff keening and screaming. Reese says something had come out of the bushes, super low to the ground and crawling toward the cabin. He had shot at it. Pretty much that was how the rest of the night went. It was literally screaming constantly for the next 2 hours, and we could hear stuff moving out into the tree line. But it never came back up to the cabin until everyone had finally fallen asleep. Tan had been sitting in the chair watching the door with his rifle. Nobody else heard or saw this, and he told me 2 days later after the whole thing was over. He said he had been nodding off after the screaming and noises finally stopped. He had been almost asleep when he saw someone come out of the bathroom and then lay down in the middle of the floor and go to sleep. He just assumed it was one of us and he had nodded off. Then he said he kind of realized something was wrong, and while pretending to be sleeping, he counted us. There were 9 people in the cabin. He basically didn't want to try to shoot at the thing in the cabin and have it kill us all then and there, or have Reese wake up and start shooting and then we kill ourselves. So he just stayed awake all night pretending to be asleep. He said sometimes it would stand up and kind of do this weird jittery thing or heave like it was laughing, but then it would lay back down. We woke up, and I noticed that Tan was a little jittery and that he was avoiding looking at all of us. But we ate some breakfast, packed up, and started walking to his house. He stayed last in the cabin and said he'd lock up and bring me my uncle's keys, to just start walking and he'd catch up, which I didn't really want to do. We got a little bit up the path, and when he came running up, basically we just jogged back to his house. His cousin took us home. There was a window in the bathroom. Tan had gone back to lock up and looked in there. We were too stupid to lock a screenless window. The window was open when he went in there. I'm guessing it had been doing that all along, waiting for us to fall asleep or slip up and then getting in among us. It walked with us all the damn way back to his house, and then he said it lagged to the back of the group and looked him dead in the eyes before walking into the woods. I decided to camp in Yellowstone National Park because I wanted to reconnect with nature and escape the suffocating grind of city life. The idea had been brewing in my mind for months, and as someone who rarely did anything adventurous nowadays, I finally convinced myself that a solo camping trip would be the perfect way to find some peace. The drive to Yellowstone was long but stunning. Mountains rose like giants on the horizon, and dense forests stretched endlessly on either side of the road. When I reached the park entrance, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Yellowstone's vast wilderness was both beautiful and intimidating. I chose a remote campsite, far from the main areas. I didn't want to be near the tourists or crowded spots. I wanted solitude. After a ranger gave me a map and a few safety warnings about wildlife, I drove deep into the park following a narrow dirt road until I found the clearing that would be my campsite for the weekend. The area was perfect. Tall pine trees surrounded the clearing, their tops swaying gently in the breeze. A small stream trickled nearby, and the ground was soft with moss. I pitched my tent, set up my small camping stove, and settled in for the evening. The first night was uneventful, almost peaceful. The distant sounds of crickets and the occasional howl of wolves added to the charm of being in the wilderness. As I lay in my tent, looking up at the stars through the small mesh window, I felt like I had made the right choice. The next morning I explored the nearby trails, taking pictures of the breathtaking scenery. The smell of pine filled the air, and the gentle sound of the stream was like a soothing melody. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. By late afternoon, clouds began to gather and the wind picked up. I decided to head back to my campsite before it got dark. As I walked back, I noticed something strange near the trail. A patch of grass flattened as if something heavy had been lying there. Nearby, I found claw marks etched deep into the bark of a tree. The marks were unnerving. They were too large to be from a bear, and the grooves were deep, as if whatever made them had immense strength. I brushed it off, telling myself it was probably an animal passing through. After all, this was Yellowstone. Wild animals were part of the deal. That night, the atmosphere felt different. The usual sounds of the forest were gone. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an eerie, oppressive silence. I sat by my campfire, eating a can of beans, trying to shake off the growing unease. Then I heard it. A low growl, faint but unmistakable, came from somewhere in the trees. My heart stopped and I froze, staring into the darkness beyond the firelight. Probably a wolf, I muttered to myself, though my voice trembled. The growl came again, louder this time, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps crunching through the underbrush. Whatever it was large, and it was getting closer. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the sound. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but I saw nothing. Still, the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I backed into my tent, zipping it shut and clutching my small camping knife. It was a pathetic defense, but it was all I had. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint movements outside, branches snapping, leaves rustling, heavy breathing. When dawn finally broke, I unzipped my tent cautiously. The clearing was empty, but something was off. The fire pit had been disturbed, and claw marks gouged the ground around it. I knew I should leave. Every instinct told me to pack up and go, but my stubbornness, or maybe my pride, kept me there. I told myself it was just a bear or some other animal curious about the fire, but deep down, I knew this was different. The day passed uneventfully, though the unease lingered. I spent most of it near the campsite, too nervous to venture far. As the sun dipped below the horizon, I gathered as much firewood as I could, determined to keep the fire burning all night. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to come alive. The silence was replaced by faint, distant sounds, howls, growls, and something else, almost like a deep, guttural snarl. I sat close to the fire, clutching my flashlight, scanning the tree line. Then I saw it. Two glowing eyes, yellow and piercing, stared at me from the shadows. They were too high off the ground to belong to any normal animal. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The eyes didn't move, they just watched me, unblinking. Then slowly a figure stepped into the firelight. It was massive, standing on two legs like a man but covered in thick dark fur. Its head was unmistakably canine, long snout, sharp teeth glinting in the firelight. But its body was muscular and humanoid. Its clawed hands hung by its sides, and its chest rose and fell with each deep breath. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The creature let out a low, menacing growl, baring its teeth. Then it dropped to all fours and charged. I ran. I didn't think, I just ran, sprinting into the woods as fast as my legs could carry me. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly, illuminating only fragments of the trees ahead. Behind me I heard the creature crashing through the underbrush, its snarls echoing through the forest. My lungs burned, and my legs screamed in protest, but I didn't dare stop. I stumbled over roots and rocks, the darkness disorienting me. Then suddenly the ground disappeared beneath me. I tumbled down a slope, rolling and crashing through bushes and debris before landing hard at the bottom. Pain shot through my shoulder, and I bit back a scream. For a moment everything was silent. I lay there gasping for breath, my body trembling. Then I heard it. The creature was at the top of the slope, its glowing eyes scanning the darkness. It let out a howl, a bone-chilling sound that made my blood run cold. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the pain, and ran deeper into the forest. After what felt like hours, I stumbled upon a small, dilapidated cabin. Its windows were broken, and the door hung loosely on its hinges, but it was shelter. I rushed inside, slamming the door shut and pushing a heavy wooden table against it. My flashlight flickered, its battery dying, leaving me in near darkness. The cabin smelled of mildew and decay, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. I found an old hunting rifle propped against the wall, but when I checked, it was empty. No ammunition. Outside, the forest had gone silent again, but I knew it was out there. Minutes passed like hours as I crouched in the corner, gripping the useless rifle. Then I heard it, the slow, deliberate sound of footsteps circling the cabin. The creature was toying with me, letting me know it was there. Its claws scraped against the walls, and its guttural growl rumbled through the thin wooden planks. I held my breath, praying it wouldn't find a way in. The cabin was my only defense, but it felt like a flimsy shield against the terror outside. The creature prowled around the perimeter, its heavy footsteps crunching through the dirt. Occasionally, it would let out a deep growl, the sound reverberating through the cabin walls. I crouched in the corner, clutching the rifle like it might offer some protection. I kept my flashlight off to avoid drawing attention, though the darkness made my imagination run wild. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind felt like it was already inside with me. Then came the scratching. The creature dragged its claws along the side of the cabin, the sound sharp and grating. It moved slowly, deliberately, as though it was testing the structure. I gritted my teeth, trying to stay quiet, but my breathing was too loud, too erratic. I pressed a hand over my mouth, praying it couldn't hear me. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. I dared to hope it had given up, but then with a deafening crash, the creature slammed against the door. The entire cabin shook, and the table I had pushed against the door groaned under the impact. "No, no, no," I muttered, my voice trembling. It slammed again, harder this time. The door wouldn't hold much longer. I knew I couldn't stay. The cabin would soon be nothing more than splinters. My only chance was to run again. I scanned the room in desperation and spotted a small broken window near the back. It was barely wide enough for me to squeeze through, but it was my only option. As the creature threw itself against the door again, I climbed onto the table below the window, wincing as the old wood creaked under my weight. I pushed the jagged glass out of the frame, cutting my hands in the process, but I didn't care. The door cracked, splinters flying into the room. I could hear the creature's guttural breathing, so close now. With one final push, I wriggled through the window, landing awkwardly on the ground outside. My ankle twisted painfully, but I forced myself to get up and run. The creature roared, a sound of pure rage, and I heard it crash through the cabin, tearing apart what was left of the structure. I didn't look back. The forest was an endless maze, each shadow a potential hiding spot for the creature. The moonlight barely filtered through the thick canopy, and my flashlight had died completely. I stumbled blindly, relying on instinct more than sight. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the trees. Its pace was relentless, its snarls growing louder with every passing second. My lungs burned, my legs screamed in protest, but fear pushed me forward. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stop. Then in the distance, I saw a faint glow. At first, I thought it was a hallucination, my mind playing tricks on me. But as I got closer, the glow grew brighter. It was a fire, a large one. I stumbled into a clearing and saw a group of people, campers. There were 3 of them, sitting around the fire, their faces illuminated by the flickering flames. "Help!" I screamed, my voice hoarse. They turned toward me, startled. "There's something in the woods," I gasped, collapsing to my knees. Before they could respond, the creature burst into the clearing. The campers froze, their faces a mix of confusion and fear, as they took in the massive, snarling beast. "What the hell is that?" one of them shouted, scrambling to his feet. The creature roared, its eyes glowing with fury. It lunged toward the group, moving with terrifying speed. One of the campers tried to fight back, swinging a heavy branch at the creature. It swatted him aside like he was nothing, sending him flying into the fire. The other 2 ran, their screams echoing through the clearing. The creature chased them, its powerful strides making the ground tremble. I watched in horror, too terrified to move. The firelight cast monstrous shadows of the beast as it hunted the campers, their cries fading into the distance. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I forced myself to my feet, every muscle in my body screaming in protest. I had to keep moving. I had to find help. The sounds of the creature's hunt grew fainter as I stumbled through the forest, though the feeling of being watched never left me. Then finally, I saw them, flashlights bobbing in the distance, accompanied by the faint sound of voices. "Rangers!" I screamed, my voice breaking. "Help me!" The lights turned toward me, and moments later 2 park rangers emerged from the trees, their rifles drawn. "What's going on?" one of them asked, his eyes scanning the darkness. "There's something out there," I stammered, clutching my side. "It's killing people." The rangers exchanged a look, their faces grim. "Let's get you out of here," one of them said, motioning for me to follow. As they led me back toward safety, I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder. The forest seemed to close in behind us, the shadows deep and impenetrable. But just before we reached the edge of the woods, I saw them. 2 glowing yellow eyes, watching us from the darkness. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Even as the rangers got me to their truck and drove me out of the park, I knew the creature was still out there, watching, waiting, and I knew it wasn't over. It would hunt again. But I didn't care because I was going home. I felt guilty about the campers, which is why I'm sharing my story online so people stay away from Yellowstone National Park. If you absolutely have to go, don't go alone or unarmed. You have been warned. It all started with a decision I regret more than anything. I was driving home late at night after visiting my parents. They live in a small, quiet town about 3 hours from the city. The visit had run longer than expected, and by the time I got on the road, the sky was pitch black. I was tired, and the thought of driving the usual route with its long stretches of highway and boring scenery felt unbearable. That's when I remembered a shortcut, a winding road that cut through the forest. It would save me about 30 minutes, and I'd driven it before during the day. But driving through the woods at night, that was new. The trees loomed tall on either side of the road, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the moonlight. My headlights barely cut through the darkness, illuminating only the gravel road and the occasional reflective glint of an animal's eyes in the distance. It was unsettling, but manageable at first. About 20 minutes in, I noticed something strange. The woods were too quiet. No crickets, no rustling leaves, not even the distant hoot of an owl. Just the hum of my car engine and the crunch of gravel under the tires. Then I saw it. At first it was just a blur in my peripheral vision, a shadow darting between the trees. I slowed down, thinking it might be a deer, but when I scanned the woods with my headlights, I saw nothing. I shook it off. The woods play tricks on your mind at night, I told myself. Probably just a raccoon or something. But a few minutes later I saw it again. This time it was closer. The figure was tall, much taller than any person, with a hunched posture and long limbs. Its fur was dark and matted, blending into the shadows of the trees. But the most unsettling part was its face, elongated like a wolf's, with glowing yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. I froze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The creature didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Then it disappeared into the woods faster than I thought anything that size could move. I pressed down on the gas pedal, my heart racing. The shortcut suddenly didn't seem like a good idea anymore. I just wanted to get out of the woods as quickly as possible. But as I rounded a bend, I saw it again, this time standing in the middle of the road. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt just a few feet away from the creature. It was even larger than I'd thought, towering over the hood of my car. Its long, clawed hands hung by its sides, and its head tilted as it stared at me, almost as if it were curious. Then it opened its mouth, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I threw the car into reverse, the tires screeching as I backed away. The creature let out a guttural growl, deep and menacing, before dropping onto all fours and sprinting toward me. It was fast, too fast. I floored the gas pedal, turning the car around as quickly as I could. The engine roared as I sped down the road, but no matter how fast I went, I could still see the creature in my rearview mirror, its glowing eyes locked on me. The road twisted and turned, the trees flashing by in a blur as I struggled to keep control of the car. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. The creature was relentless, its massive body moving with an unnatural speed and grace. At one point, it leaped onto the road behind me, its claws scraping against the asphalt as it gained ground. I tried everything, zigzagging, speeding up, even turning off my headlights for a brief moment in the hope it might lose sight of me. But nothing worked. Then, as I rounded another bend, I saw a narrow path branching off from the main road. It wasn't marked, and I had no idea where it led, but I didn't care. I veered onto it, my car bouncing violently over the uneven ground. The creature didn't follow immediately. For a brief, blissful moment, I thought I'd lost it. But then I heard it, a bone-chilling howl that echoed through the forest, followed by the sound of branches snapping and leaves rustling. It was still hunting me. The path was rough and overgrown, and it was taking a toll on my car. The suspension groaned with every bump, and I could hear the occasional scrape of branches against the undercarriage, but I didn't dare stop. Then the engine sputtered. No, 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 I muttered, panic setting in. I pressed down on the gas, but the car barely responded. Finally, it came to a complete stop, the engine dying with a pathetic whine. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, too scared to move. The woods were silent again, but I knew it was out there, waiting. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I dialed 911. The call wouldn't go through, no signal. Of course, that's when I heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, and getting closer. I locked the doors and crouched down in my seat, praying it wouldn't find me. But as the footsteps grew louder, I knew it was only a matter of time. Then came the scratching. It started at the back of the car, a faint scraping sound that quickly grew louder as the creature moved toward the driver's side. The scratching stopped just as it reached the driver's side door. My heart was pounding so loudly that I was sure the creature could hear it. I didn't dare look out the window. I was too afraid of what I might see, but I could feel its presence, an oppressive, suffocating weight pressing against the car. Then slowly the creature began to circle. I heard its claws scrape against the metal, its guttural breathing vibrating through the air. It stopped near the hood of the car, and I felt a shudder as something heavy pressed down on it. I risked a glance, just for a second. The creature was perched on the hood, its glowing eyes staring straight at me through the windshield. Its face was even more terrifying up close. canine in shape, but with an intelligence that sent chills down my spine. It tilted its head, its lips pulling back in what looked like a sinister grin, revealing sharp, glistening teeth. My entire body froze. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare back at it, my mind screaming at me to do something, anything. Then it raised a clawed hand and slammed it against the windshield. The glass cracked, spiderwebbing under the force of the blow. That was enough to jolt me into action. I threw open the car door and bolted into the woods, my feet pounding against the uneven ground. Branches whipped at my face and arms as I ran blindly, the darkness swallowing me whole. Behind me I heard the creature leap off the car and let out a deafening howl. The sound spurred me on, adrenaline fueling my every step. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. The forest seemed endless, the trees blending together in a chaotic maze. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my lungs burning as I struggled to catch my breath. Then I tripped. My foot caught on something, and I went sprawling to the ground, pain shooting through my ankle. I scrambled to get up, but before I could, I heard it. Heavy footsteps crashing through the underbrush, getting closer. I pressed myself against the ground, trying to make myself as small as possible. My heart was hammering so loudly that I was sure it would give me away. The footsteps stopped just a few feet away. I held my breath, too terrified to move. The creature was so close I could hear its breathing, deep, raspy, and uneven. It sniffed the air, its claws scratching against the ground as it moved. I dared to peek through the underbrush. The creature was pacing, its glowing eyes scanning the forest. It was searching for me. For a brief moment, I thought I might actually have a chance. If I stayed still, maybe it would lose interest and leave. But then it turned its head sharply, its ears twitching. It had found me. With a guttural growl, it lunged toward me, its massive frame crashing through the bushes. I rolled to the side just in time, its claws raking the ground where I had been lying. I scrambled to my feet and ran, ignoring the pain in my ankle. The creature was right behind me, its growls growing louder with every step. My vision blurred with tears and sweat, but I pushed forward, my mind consumed with one thought: survive. Just when I thought I couldn't run any further, I saw it. A faint light cutting through the darkness. At first I thought it was my imagination, a cruel trick of the mind. But as I got closer, the light grew brighter. Voices, I heard voices. "Over here," I screamed, my voice hoarse. "Help me." The light swung toward me and I saw them, 2 men in ranger uniforms, holding flashlights and rifles. "What the hell?" one of them started, but his words were cut off by the sound of the creature barreling toward us. "Get behind us," the other ranger yelled. I didn't need to be told twice. I stumbled toward them, collapsing to the ground as they raised their rifles. The creature emerged from the shadows, its massive frame illuminated by the flashlights. It let out a deafening roar, its yellow eyes locked on us. "Jesus Christ," one of the rangers muttered. "What is that thing?" They opened fire, the gunshots echoing through the forest. The creature recoiled, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out an ear-piercing screech and retreated into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. The rangers helped me to my feet, their faces pale and drawn. "What the hell was that?" one of them asked, his voice shaking. I didn't know how to answer. It followed me," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. They didn't press me for details. Instead, they led me back to their truck, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the oppressive darkness. As we drove back to their station, I stared out the window, half expecting to see those glowing yellow eyes watching us from the trees. The rangers dropped me off at a hospital where I was treated for exhaustion and a sprained ankle. They promised to investigate. It's been weeks since that night, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that it's not over. Every time I close my eyes, I see its face. Every time I hear a rustle in the bushes or a strange noise in the distance, my heart skips a beat. I don't take shortcuts anymore. I don't drive through the woods. But sometimes late at night I hear something outside my window, a faint scratching sound almost too quiet to notice. And I wonder if it's still hunting me. It was early March, just after my 21st birthday, when I decided it was time to embark on a personal rite of passage. I had been yearning for solitude and a chance to test myself against the elements. After weeks of persuading my parents, my mother being the most reluctant, they finally agreed to let me spend 2 weeks alone at our family cabin, nestled deep in the Canadian Rockies. Our family had always been connected to the outdoors. Weekends were filled with camping trips, hiking expeditions, and fishing adventures. My siblings and I were adept at hunting and living off the land. Survival skills were second nature to us. However, since the unexpected passing of my uncle in a hiking accident, my mother's concern for our safety had intensified. As I drove up the winding mountain road, the towering pines and crisp mountain air filled me with a sense of freedom. My phone buzzed, a call from my older brother Michael. It was likely the last call I'd received before losing service in this remote area. "Hey, Liam, just wanted to catch you before you're off the grid." His voice crackled slightly. "Hey, Mike, just enjoying the drive. What's up?" "Nothing much. Mom's been a bit anxious. You know how she gets. Just promise to stay safe, okay?" I chuckled. "Always do. Tell her not to worry. I'll be back before she knows it." "All right, take care, bro. And remember, if you decide to stay longer, make sure to come down and let us know." "Will do." The call dropped as the signal faded. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, embracing the thought of being disconnected for a while. The mountains loomed ahead, their snow-capped peaks piercing the clear blue sky. This was going to be a memorable 2 weeks. The cabin came into view, a rustic wooden structure that had been in our family for generations. It sat beside a tranquil lake, surrounded by dense forest. Inside it was cozy and functional. A small kitchen, a living area with a stone fireplace, and 2 bedrooms. The solar panels provided electricity, but there was no phone or internet service. After unloading my gear, I took a moment to soak in the serenity. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the lake and the distant call of a loon. I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The first 3 days were blissful. I spent my time fishing, hiking familiar trails, and reading by the fireplace. The weather was mild for March, and the clear skies promised good conditions for the days ahead. On the 4th day, I decided to go hunting. Early morning light filtered through the trees as I ventured deeper into the forest. After a few hours of tracking, I spotted a majestic elk grazing in a clearing. Holding my breath, I lined up the shot and fired. The elk fell instantly, a clean, humane kill. Approaching the animal, I admired its grandeur. The antlers were impressive, and the meat would sustain me for the rest of my stay. Realizing the elk was too heavy to transport whole, I decided to field dress it on the spot. I propped my rifle against a nearby tree, pulled out my hunting knife, and began the meticulous process. Once I'd prepared a sizable portion to bring back, I cleaned my knife in the snow, stuck it into the tree above my rifle, and headed back to the cabin with the meat. My plan was to start cooking and then return to retrieve the rest. Back at the cabin, I started a fire in the outdoor pit and placed the elk meat over it, seasoning it with herbs I had gathered. The aroma promised a hearty meal. Satisfied, I decided to return to the site to collect more meat while it cooked. As I trekked back, an inexplicable chill ran down my spine. The temperature hadn't dropped, but a sense of unease settled over me. I shrugged it off as a random shiver and pressed on. About halfway there, I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, a dark figure darting behind a tree. "Hello," I called out. "Is someone there?" Silence. Perhaps it was a deer or my imagination playing tricks. Upon reaching the clearing, I froze. The area was pristine, as if untouched. The elk's carcass, the remnants of my field dressing, all gone. Even my knife and rifle were missing from the tree. Panic began to creep in. I scanned the area for any signs, but found none. No footprints, no bloodstains, nothing. I searched frantically, my mind racing. Bears? But they would have left tracks. A poacher? But why erase all signs and take my equipment? The lack of footprints was baffling. The snow was undisturbed except for my own. Heart pounding, I hurried back to the cabin, trying to make sense of the situation. When I arrived, the fire had died down, and the meat I left cooking was nowhere to be found. Confusion turned to dread. Was someone messing with me? That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak and rustle amplified in the silence. Around midnight, I heard a soft tapping at the window. I sat up, straining to listen. The tapping continued, irregular and faint. Gripping a flashlight, I approached the window cautiously. Peering through the glass, I saw nothing but darkness and the faint outline of trees. Telling myself it was just a branch in the wind, I returned to bed, though sleep did not come easily. The next morning I decided to stay close to the cabin. The eerie incidents had unsettled me. I occupied myself by chopping wood and tending to small repairs around the property. As evening approached, I noticed the stack of firewood I'd prepared earlier was missing. Frustration turned to fear. Someone or something was lurking around. Determined to catch the culprit, I decided to set up a simple alarm system using bells and fishing line around the perimeter. Hours passed in silence. Just as I began to doubt myself, the bells jingled softly. Heart racing, I grabbed my rifle and stepped onto the porch. The forest was silent, the trees casting long shadows in the moonlight. Then, at the edge of the tree line, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing unnaturally still. It was tall and gaunt, with limbs that seemed too long for its body. Its eyes reflected the moonlight with an eerie glow. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady. No response. The figure tilted its head as if studying me. Before I could react, the figure moved with inhuman speed, disappearing into the forest. Against my better judgment, I gave chase, driven by a mix of fear and determination to uncover the truth. The underbrush seemed to claw at me as I pursued the shadow. The forest grew denser, and the canopy above blocked out most of the moonlight. The figure was always just ahead, slipping between the trees effortlessly. Suddenly I stumbled into a small clearing illuminated by a shaft of moonlight. The figure stood at the opposite edge, its features now more discernible. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its eyes were voids of darkness. It opened its mouth, revealing a row of sharp, jagged teeth. A guttural sound emanated from it, a mix between a growl and a hiss. Paralyzed with fear, I watched as it began to advance toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Snapping out of my trance, I raised the rifle and fired. The shot echoed through the forest, but the creature remained unaffected. It was as if the bullet passed right through it. Realizing the futility, I turned and ran, adrenaline fueling my escape. Branches whipped against my face and the cold air burned my lungs. The creature's pursuit was silent, but I could feel its presence closing in. Bursting through the cabin door, I slammed it shut and bolted it. My heart pounded in my ears as I backed away, eyes fixed on the entrance. Minutes passed in silence. Had I lost it? Suddenly, a slow, deliberate scratching began at the door. The sound was unnerving, like nails on a chalkboard. Then came the whispers, indecipherable but chilling, as if multiple voices were speaking in hushed tones. I searched frantically for anything to barricade the door. Grabbing a heavy bookshelf, I pushed it against the entrance. The scratching intensified, now accompanied by thudding knocks that rattled the hinges. Remembering the emergency flare gun in the supply closet, I armed myself and took a defensive position. The windows rattled as shadows moved outside, darting back and forth. Without warning, the largest window shattered, and the creature began to crawl through the opening. Its movements were disjointed, limbs bending at unnatural angles. Summoning every ounce of courage, I aimed the flare gun and fired. The flare struck the creature, igniting it in a burst of fiery light. It let out a piercing scream that reverberated through the cabin before retreating into the darkness. Silence settled once more, but I knew it was far from over. I secured the broken window as best I could, using furniture and spare wood planks. The rest of the night was a blur of terror. The creatures, there were more than one now, circled the cabin, their whispers and scratches relentless. Exhausted and terrified, I huddled in the corner with the rifle and a hunting knife at the ready. Sleep was impossible. Every so often I thought I saw glowing eyes peering through cracks or heard faint laughter. As dawn approached, the activity outside began to wane. The first rays of sunlight seemed to keep the creatures at bay. Seizing the opportunity, I decided I needed to leave immediately. Gathering essential supplies, I cautiously exited the cabin. The forest was eerily quiet, but the oppressive feeling had lifted slightly. My truck was parked a short distance away. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, I made my way toward it. Just as I reached the vehicle, a shriek pierced the air. One of the creatures emerged from behind a tree, sprinting toward me with alarming speed. I fumbled with the keys, hands shaking uncontrollably. The engine roared to life just as the creature reached the truck. It slammed into the side, leaving a deep dent. I floored the accelerator, the tires kicking up gravel as I sped down the dirt road. In the rearview mirror, I saw more of them emerging from the forest, their figures becoming smaller as I gained distance. The winding mountain road required all my concentration, but the overwhelming need to escape kept me focused. After what felt like hours, I reached the main highway. The morning sun bathed the landscape in a comforting glow. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town. At the local sheriff's office, I recounted my harrowing experience. Sheriff Daniels listened intently, his expression a mix of skepticism and concern. "Son, are you sure about what you saw? These mountains have a way of playing tricks on the mind, especially when you're alone," he said kindly. "I know how it sounds, but I'm telling the truth," I insisted. "Something is out there." He sighed. "I'll send Deputy Harris up to your cabin to check things out. In the meantime, why don't you get some rest?" Feeling dismissed but too exhausted to argue, I agreed. I checked into a motel and collapsed onto the bed, sleep overtaking me almost instantly. I awoke to a knock at the door. Opening it, I found Deputy Harris standing there. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. "Sure," I replied, stepping aside. "I went up to your cabin," he began. "Place is a bit of a mess. Broken window, damaged door. But I didn't find any signs of these creatures you mentioned." I frowned. "Did you check the woods, look for tracks?" He shook his head. "Snowfall last night covered any tracks that might have been there. Look, Liam, I'm not saying you didn't experience something, but maybe it was a bear or a mountain lion. Stress and isolation can do strange things to a person." Frustration welled up inside me. "I know what I saw." He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "Get some rest. Maybe take a break from the cabin for a while." After he left, I felt more isolated than ever. Determined to find answers, I headed to the local library. If the authorities wouldn't help, I'd have to figure it out myself. In the dusty archives of the library, I searched for any records of unusual occurrences in the area. Hours passed as I combed through old newspapers, journals, and local folklore books. Finally, I stumbled upon an old legend, a tale of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that haunted the forests, preying on those who showed greed or disturbed the natural balance. Descriptions matched the creatures I had encountered. Gaunt figures, insatiable hunger, and the ability to mimic human voices. Chills ran down my spine as I read accounts from settlers and indigenous peoples alike. Could it be possible that I had crossed paths with such an entity? Despite every instinct telling me to stay away, I knew I had to confront this. I reached out to a local indigenous elder, Joseph Black Elk, whose family had lived in the area for generations. Meeting at his modest home on the reservation, I recounted my experience. He listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing little. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "The Wendigo is a powerful spirit, a warning against excess and disrespect for nature," he said, "but it is not invincible." "What can I do?" I asked, desperation evident in my voice. He considered me carefully. "You must make amends. Perform a cleansing ritual to restore balance. I will guide you." That evening, we journeyed back to the cabin. Joseph carried a bundle of sacred herbs and tools. The sun was setting as we began the ritual. We lit a fire in the clearing where I had first encountered the creature. Joseph chanted in his native language, the words melodic and soothing. He sprinkled herbs into the flames, the fragrant smoke rising into the twilight sky. "Speak from your heart," he instructed. "Acknowledge your actions and ask for forgiveness." Taking a deep breath, I spoke aloud. "I came here seeking solitude, but may have disrespected the land and its spirits. I ask for forgiveness and pledge to honor the balance of nature." The wind picked up, swirling around us. For a moment I thought I saw shadows moving at the edge of the firelight, but they remained distant. Joseph concluded the ritual with a final chant. The oppressive feeling that had plagued me seemed to lift, replaced by a sense of peace. Over the next few days, I remained at the cabin under Joseph's guidance. We repaired the damage, cleaned the area where I had field-dressed the elk, and offered prayers of thanks. The forest seemed different now, still wild and mysterious, but less threatening. The creatures did not return, and I felt a renewed connection to the land. Before departing, Joseph left me with words of wisdom. Respect is a two-way path. Honor the spirits, and they will honor you. I returned home with a newfound understanding. My family listened as I recounted everything, their skepticism giving way to concern and then acceptance. Years have passed since that fateful trip. I've continued to explore the wilderness, but always with a deep respect for the natural world and its unseen forces. The cabin remains a cherished family retreat, and I've shared my experience with others, hoping to impart the lessons I learned. Some dismiss it as a tall tale, but those who have felt the profound presence of nature understand. There are mysteries in this world that defy explanation, and perhaps it's better that way. In embracing the unknown, I found not just survival but personal growth. The journey tested me in ways I could never have anticipated, shaping the person I've become. The mountains stand eternal, their peaks touching the heavens, their forests whispering ancient secrets. I often return to that place not with fear but with reverence. My rite of passage was not the adventure I had envisioned, but it was the one I needed. It taught me humility, respect, and the importance of balance. As I gaze upon the rugged landscape, I feel a connection that goes beyond words, a silent understanding between man and nature. Some stories are meant to be shared, not to instill fear, but to inspire respect and wonder. This is mine, and I hope it serves as a reminder to tread lightly, listen deeply, and honor the world we are privileged to inhabit.